Let's look at some best practices in file storage. So here's some best practices for data storage. The problem is that this screenshot is taken from a website that was updated last in 2005. That's 10 years ago. It advises that you should update your methods of storage, and notice what it refers to are diskettes. And even then, 10 years ago, saying that they were not the best form of storage. So it's possible that some of the practices you're currently using to save your files are outdated, and this video will help us develop some best practices for 2015 saving files. Here are some of the options you have for file storage. One of them is highlighted, and that is where we'll spend most of our time on this video. You can save to your H drive, but the problem with the H drive is that the file storage is limited. It is in the megabyte range. We'll talk more about that in just a minute, and it is accessible only when you're on the PCSC network. You can use personal flash drives, and those are great, except that sometimes they break, and if that happens, you can lose everything stored on that file. Again, the storage is limited, this time in the gigabyte range. External hard drives are great backup storage. It is definitely advisable, if you have one, to occasionally archive your work. You can get external hard drives that save up to the terabyte range. You never ever should save to your C drive or your desktop, and the reason for this is that that file is saved in only one location, and if something happens to your computer or it has to be reimaged, then you have lost that one file copy. The one you see highlighted is called cloud storage. Plainfield uses OneDrive for Business. It is different than the Microsoft OneDrive that is offered and that you may use personally. This OneDrive for Business is connected to a program called SharePoint, and it offers 1 terabyte of storage. Measuring how much file storage you have available is using a unit called bytes. So 1 byte is approximately the size of 1 character that needs to be stored. These days, files are in the megabyte range routinely, sometimes up to gigabyte ranges. You'll notice that a CD-ROM has a maximum capacity in the megabyte range. We looked at the H drive is in the gigabyte range, and you'll notice that the terabyte can store vastly more information than the gigabyte or the megabyte. So cloud-based storage works like this. You save a file on your computer, you save a copy locally, and at that same time, it immediately begins a sync up to the cloud. In this case, our cloud is stored and managed by Microsoft. That file is then saved in a copy in the cloud. When I work on it on my computer again, I'm opening the local copy that's synced to the cloud, make changes, and that sync goes back and forth so that the file is kept most updated. When I go home or get on my smartphone, I can actually access a copy of that same file because the original file now is stored in the cloud. When I'm working with these files, it's important to make sure that I have my files completely updated in the cloud. So it's possible it's updated on the computer I'm working on, but those changes haven't been saved to the cloud, in which case I would lose those if anything happened to my computer. So in the green box, you're looking at good symbols for this. We're seeing the green line underneath the icon for OneDrive for Business that's located at the bottom of your Windows screen. It shows me that my files are updating. When my files are up to date, you'll see a green checkbox with the file folder or the file name itself. In the red box are things that indicate problems that need to be resolved in order to assure that those files are actually saved in the cloud. There's a triangle, a yellow triangle with an exclamation point, a red X, and then you see in a file folder here this blue arrow symbol indicating that the file is syncing. If it's caught in syncing, then that means it has not completely updated. So the only thing you want to see when all of your files are updated and maintained properly are these green checks. What you name your files matters. These are some tips for good naming strategies. First of all, you can follow the link to an article in PC Magazine that gives some great best practices for organization techniques for files. Big ideas. Avoid some characters when you're naming files. You see a list of them down the right-hand side of this slide. Number 2, avoid over-nesting. So this practice refers to using folders within folders within folders to keep your files organized. Now at one point, remember, this was actually a best practice for file storage. It was good to have subfolders within subfolders. Because of the way files are stored in the cloud today, that practice is outdated. And so if I've got folder 1 and folder 2 and folder 3, and finally the file I'm looking for is in folder 4, what we're doing is creating a complicated structure that's not going to allow us to store and access this file as best as possible. So maybe a better practice is, instead of having all of these folders, I go back to folder 1 and I use the start of the file name to keep track of it. So if I want to have class 1 and then the file name, then when I'm looking at folder 1, all of the class 1 files could be organized together and I could keep track of them. Last thing to note, and this is related to this overnesting problem, is that the total limit for the characters is 255 that I have in a string of a name. And every time I add a folder, that's adding characters to the name. So folder 1, folder 2, folder 3, and folder 4, all of those characters count in the name, in addition to however many characters I use to name the file itself.